Welcome to my transparent watercolor paint along Fairport Harbor Light. This is part 3, the narrated tutorial. The photograph on the right was a reference and inspiration for this painting. This is Fairport Harbor West Breakwater Lighthouse, one of the Great Lakes lighthouses on Lake Erie. I drew my sketch directly on my quarter sheet of 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. The drawing consists mainly of the path that leads up to the lighthouse and the major shapes and details of the lighthouse itself. The other major shapes are indicated with just some simple lines, and some simple lines also to give an indication of where the tree shapes are going to be. I'm going to begin by applying a nice even sky wash. It's not my intention to have a lot of cloud activity in this painting, so my objective is to lead the bead of water down my page and apply a nice even tone from the top of the page to the horizon line, and I'm going to stop at the horizon line. So it's important that I maintain a bead of water or I'll get a hard edge and I won't have this nice smooth transition going down. And it's also important that I start with a big pool of mixed paint so that I have enough to cover the paper without running out. I'm using a 1-inch flat brush. This is a silver black velvet brush that I really like. It's a nice wash brush. And you can see that even though I have a fairly large brush, I can still, by manipulating the angle or the part of the brush I'm using, I can put the carry the wash straight up to the edge of the lighthouse shape. And as long as I maintain the bead of water, I'm going to get a nice continuous wash. The minute I let an area dry a little bit, and if I try to continue it, I'm going to start to get a hard edge or a backwash. So I'm taking this wash right down to the horizon line. And I'm working on an angle. I wouldn't be able to do this if I wasn't working on an angle. It's about 20 degrees. And I'm leading that down the page. And because the wash will follow the path of least resistance, it's going to go to where the paper's wet. And it's not going to go into the dry area. That's just going to give enough resistance that it will keep a nice clean edge and keep that wash out as long as I keep it dry. And as I said, you can't get this nice even wash working flat. You have to work at an incline and let gravity do some of the work. The color I use for this wash is a Holbein color. It's called Peacock Blue. Its pigments are PG7 and PB15, but you could use any one of a number of different blues, such as manganese or cerulean. I'm going to begin to paint the area that represents the water behind the lighthouse. It's a very narrow strip because of the placement of the horizon line. And I'm applying clear water in this area to start. And I'm taking it over the edge of the sky wash. Just a little bit. Now I'm going to put some color in this area where I put the clear water. So this is just a little darker mixture of the peacock blue. And I'm going to also bring in a little bit of a green tone, which is a mixture of sap green and pyrrole red here at the lower part of that shape. Because of the way the water is in the photo, you have this darker, warmer tone that's in that area. And you can see though that the blue tone that I have there, how it just gives kind of that hazy horizon line. I'm going to take a little more clear water there. And it kind of gives that hazy horizon line that you see sometimes out there on the lake. I'm going to start to prepare to apply a large wash over the ground cover area. So to do that, I'm starting to put a wash of clear water down in the areas that I'm going to be painting, because I want to have a softness as these colors mix on my page. I'm going to begin putting some washes in here, and this is a middle value raw sienna, and I'm going to use some mixtures here that have raw sienna, a little burnt sienna, and some with a little cerulean blue to gray it down a little bit. And you can see that I have drawn these, I guess they're like almost like a marker to mark the path. I wouldn't call it a fence, but they're just posts along the trail there. And I'm not concerned with painting over those, because when I paint those, they're just going to be a dark valued shape. So I'm not trying to paint around them, because when I paint over it, you won't even know that I had this wash over top of it. I'm continuing with this wash on the left side of the composition here. And you can see that I'm treating this ground cover as it's one big shape. I applied my clear water in this area here that is the shape that's defined by the ground cover. And then I began bringing in my paint. And I've got the raw sienna with some burnt sienna mixed in, and some with some cerulean blue. And now I've taken a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue that gives me almost a dark neutral gray, and I'm putting some of that in here. And what I'm going to do is I want to give the indication of this being a grassy ground cover, but I'm not going to paint every blade of straw or grass that's growing here. So I've applied this wash, and I'm going to come in with a scraper. I'm going to scrape away to give the indication of a grassy ground cover. So I'm putting in a little bit more color here. Now this whole shape is wet, and if I try to scrape too soon, the paint's just going to flow back into the area and it'll leave a mark, but it won't leave the kind of mark that I'm after. It almost kind of bruises the paper. It makes a dark mark, and I'm after to scrape away the paint and leave a light mark when the scraper goes by. So I have this plastic scraper here, and what you want is you want the paper to be moist but not shiny wet. So you're almost looking for just a sheen on the surface. And when you get to that point where your paper just has a sheen and it's not shiny wet, you can scrape away the paint and it won't flow back, and it's still moist enough to be moved. So there's a balance here. You have to hit the right spot in between when it's very wet and when it's too dry to move the paint. So what you're actually doing with the scraper is you're actually moving paint. You're not scraping into the paper. Sometimes people take a razor blade and scrape away, actually removing paper from the surface. That's not what you're doing here. It's at a consistency, it's at a point where by moving this plastic edge against the paper, you're actually pushing the paint away and leaving a white or light mark. And like I said, if it gets too dry, you can't do that. And if it's too wet, the paint will just flow back in, and you won't be able to achieve the result that you're after, the texture that you're after. And that's really what I'm after here, is I'm just trying to create texture that gives the suggestion of a grassy feeling. And you can, by your strokes with a scraper, you can make it feel directional. You can have it slope kind of curving in like here towards the path, or going up in a way. It's just the direction that you make your marks. And then when you group these together, you start to get that feeling of a motion going into one direction. The scraper I'm using is a scraper that I got, I believe, with a order from Cheap Joe's. It was a freebie that I got with my order. But you can use a cut-up credit card or similar piece of plastic. Just cut it at different angles and you have a variety of widths to scrape with. I'm going to begin working on the right side of my composition here where I have trees that start to enter the picture. And I'm putting down a light wash, a very light wash of some burnt sienna with a little ultramarine blue and some raw sienna. And when you have a grouping of trees, and in this time of the season here, they didn't have leaves on them, you have all these branches and they start to create almost a shape. The volume of branches start to create almost a shape and just kind of a hazy shape. And so I'm putting this wash down to kind of to give that feeling, and then I'll make branch shapes over top of this wash. Now I'm going to start to put a wash on the path area, and I want this to feel different than the rest of the ground cover. So really I'm doing it by making it one. It's a different color. It's got a little bit more cerulean blue with some burnt sienna in it. And it's a nice flat wash, which it doesn't have all the busyness that's going on in this, the kind of the grassy areas to the side. Next, I'm going to start putting a cool wash on the shadowed side of the lighthouse structure. And I've got a mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Not a lot of burnt sienna, but just a little bit that tones down the ultramarine blue a little bit. So this is a cool tone, and I'm painting this with a 1/2 inch flat brush. I want to give the indication of a little bit of reflected light, so I'm going to take a warm tone with just a touch of raw sienna and put it into this wash and let it mix a little bit or gradate into the ultramarine blue mixture that I have there. There's a gray band that wraps around the base of the lighthouse. So I'm using the same mixture, however, I've added a bit more burnt sienna to take it more towards a neutral gray. And I'm using that along the base. I'm going to get the shadow on the eave, under the eave of the roof there. So I'm going to treat that almost like it's a continuation of the shadow from the side of the building. It's just a continuation, so there's no break in the wash really. I'm going to take my brush and get a few more of these shadowed areas, and I'm going to work around the windows a little bit. These windows are kind of recessed into this stone wall, and so they have a little bit of a shadow area there. So I'm giving that indication just with just a touch of the brush. So I have this 1/2 inch flat brush, and all I need to do is just touch the area where I want to indicate the shadow. And you can see where I can use the corner of my brush to get a little smaller area, a little bit more precise, or I can just turn it and use it the whole end of the tip of the brush. But there's a variety of brush marks you can make with most brushes, in particular flat brushes, just by rotating them around. I'm going to begin working on the windows with a darker value, and as I do that I'm going to insert the reference photo there in the top left so you can give a comparison to the photograph as this evolves. So now I have a quill brush that I like to use for detail work. It holds a lot of paint, but it comes to a very sharp point. So the dark value mixture I'm using is royal blue, a Holbein color, and with a little burnt sienna in it to take a little more towards neutral. And just kind of busy work here a little bit, just getting all these windows. I'm not trying to get too fancy with these shapes. A lot of times I'll break these shapes up more than what I am in this lighthouse. I'm being more direct in painting kind of the rectangles as I see them. Sometimes I'll break those shapes up a lot more than what I am. I'll take a darker value around the base of this lighthouse and paint some of these shapes here. And this is a darker valued gray, and it's simply more pigment in the mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. I'm taking this gray, and I've added a little bit more burnt sienna to it to warm it up a little bit, and I put a touch of raw sienna in actually. And I'm getting this shape of the base that the lighthouse, the stonework that's around that lighthouse, but it's a lot of it's hidden by the grass. You'll see as I apply this wash that the darker, the kind of the cooler tone that I'm applying right now is mingling with the paint that I already have on the paper, because the paper is very wet from the first area of wash I put down, and I'm letting this the variety of the warm and the cool kind of merge in the wet and wet of the paper. To be successful with watercolor, you have to have an awareness of the moisture content in your paper and in your brush. That fundamental concept, I think, sometimes is overlooked when somebody's first starting out in watercolor. Without that awareness, you really don't have any idea on when you can or can't apply paint to an area to get the specific result you're after, and that just leads to a lot of frustration. In this particular instance, I was able to apply the dark value, kind of a cooler color, and a warmer light valued wash together there and let them merge and mingle on the paper, and it is a smooth transition. Had I waited much longer, I might have got a hard edge or undesirable backwash. So those are the types of things where you're after a certain result and you don't get it. It can lead to that frustration that I mentioned. I've decided that I want that shadowed area on the lighthouse structure to be a deeper value and a cooler, bluer tone. So I'm going to come in now and apply that wash. I felt it was dark enough when I first applied it, but after drying it, it gets much lighter, and I decided I want to darken that up just a little bit. I'm going to begin working on the roof of the lighthouse, and I'm using a mixture of quinacridone and coral with a little bit of raw sienna in it. And when I want to cool that down a little bit, I'll add some cerulean blue. Here I'm getting the larger area of the roof. So I'm going to put this one tone down, and then I'll work with a bit cooler or darker values where I feel I need it to create some shadowed areas. Now here I'm going to put a much darker value under the very edge of the roof. And to darken that up, that dark, I've added some royal blue. I use royal blue a lot to darken various pigments up to get darker values. I'm going to start to put some darker values along this path to create an edge and give more definition and separation between just the general ground cover and the path. Here I'm going darker and cooler, and I'm going to put a few of these marks, and I'm going to come back with my plastic scraper, and I'm going to scrape in that wash that I just put down to give some of the same texture that I have in the other areas of that ground cover. So just a little bit, just dragging it up and scraping the paint to give me some texture. Now I'm going to put in these sticks that are the kind of the markers for the path. And I'm not just making a solid straight line. I'm breaking that mark up a little bit, giving a suggestion that maybe there's a piece of grass or a stick or something going in front of it. And there are different angles and there are different lengths. I'm trying to give some variety there, and but help use that direction and the angle that they're facing or that they're pointing to help lead down the path. I'm going to come in now with a wash of quinacridone and coral to make that color a bit of a stronger statement. Feel the color that I have down is just too pale, and I probably could have come in with a stronger initial wash, but it lightened up quite a bit. And so I'm going to come in with this quinacridone and coral, and I'm going to go over this shape, and I'm going to soften some of these edges as I go. So I've got this pretty well covered, and I'm going to come in with this fine mist spray and soften some of those edges. Now I'm going to come back in and put some more texture in this and create some overlap too as I make these strokes. But I have a damp nylon brush here. It's about a 3/4 inch flat brush, and I've dipped it in water and taken some of the moisture away. But I'm doing some lifting here. So I take that brush and drag it along in that area where I created the scraping texture, and then I drag that color up a little bit. So it creates some more overlap, but it just adds to the texture, the textural qualities of that ground cover. Now I'm going to take this rigger brush, and I'm using a similar mixture here with the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna. But now I'm just giving the indication of some branches hanging out, coming in from the side. These are not trying to copy specific branches in the photograph. I'm just trying to give that suggestion of this kind of overhanging tree branches that are coming into the picture in the foreground. And I'm putting these brush marks down over top of the light wash that I put in earlier, which gives that feeling of the mass of branches there. I don't have to paint them all. It's just that suggestion of that, that I achieved that suggestion with the wash that I put down. Now here I'm giving the indication of these trees a little farther down the path, and I've changed the color a little bit there. The tone that I'm putting down is warmer than what I had here in the foreground. It's got more burnt sienna in the mixture. Now over here on the left side, there's a few branches coming up, and they disappear into the grassy ground cover there. I treated this side a little differently than the right side. The right side has trees, so I put that light wash down to give a suggestion of all the branches. On the left side here, these are just some little saplings or weeds that are just growing up through the brush, and they don't have near the volume that the grouping of trees had on the right. And that concludes part 3, the narrated step-by-step tutorial for my transparent watercolor paint along Fairport Harbor Light. I hope you enjoyed this. Be sure to check out Rick Surwitz Watercolor's friends and subscribers on Facebook. And if you ever have any questions about my materials, you can always go to the studio page of my website. If you have specific questions, you can always email me at contactrsurwitzart@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.